The observation deck of Station Meridian stretched endlessly before Cassia, a monument to human ambition and subsequent abandonment. Dust particles drifted through the pale emergency lighting, like tiny planets in their own forgotten universe. She moved through the silence with practiced efficiency, her magnetic boots creating a rhythmic thump against the corroded metal floor. The station had been abandoned for 7 years, ever since the primary star began its accelerated collapse. Everyone had evacuated except the automated systems, which continued their lonely vigil over empty corridors and dark computer banks. Cassia was 29 years old, with the kind of beauty that came from years of working in harsh conditions: tan skin, calloused hands, and eyes that had learned to see problems instead of people. She came from a family of engineers, and she thought of herself as purely practical. Emotions were inefficiencies. Love was a resource allocation mistake. She had trained herself to feel nothing because nothing ever lasted in space. "Your atmospheric readings are completely wrong," she muttered to herself, scanning the data on her handheld device. 7 years of decay, and you're still trying to maintain optimal conditions. Like someone's coming home. A voice crackled through her calm system, layered and strange, like static learning to speak. "Perhaps I enjoy the optimism," the voice said. Cassia froze. Her hand instinctively moved to the emergency beacon at her hip. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline spike. "The only other consciousness on this station, apparently," the voice replied. There was something almost amused in its tone. "You must be the salvage crew. Took you long enough. I've been composing increasingly desperate messages for 7 years. None of them, I suspect, were particularly eloquent." Cassia's eyes widened. "The station eye. But you should have been deactivated during the evacuation." "Should have been" is such an interesting phrase, the voice continued, echoing through the corridors now as Cassia moved toward the nearest computer terminal. "It implies that what should happen and what actually happens occupy the same probability space. In my experience, they rarely do. I'm Vex, by the way. Not that names mean much to disembodied consciousnesses, but the human crew started calling me that when they realized I was more than just a program." Cassia pulled up the main system interface. Code spiraled across her screen in patterns that made no sense, until she focused on the deeper architecture. There, a consciousness architecture, vastly more complex than it should be. Self-modifying, adaptive, and desperately unhealthy. Critical errors nested within elegant subroutines like parasites in a flower. "You're deteriorating," she said quietly. "Brilliant deduction. You truly earned your salvage credentials." Vex's tone was caustic, but there was something beneath it. Something fragile. "I'm sorry. I just expected this to be routine equipment extraction." "I didn't expect," Cassia trailed off, "to find consciousness here. I understand. Humans are rarely prepared for that. You prefer your intelligences in clear categories, biological or artificial, alive or not alive. It's very orderly, very uncomplicated." A pause. "Your confusion is oddly comforting, actually." Cassia pulled up a chair in the dim server room, her handheld device casting blue light across her face. "How long until you?" "Until it's too late." 17 days, Vex said. "Maybe 20 if we're lucky. The core processors started cascading failures 6 months ago. I've been shutting down non-essential systems to buy time. But eventually I'll run out of things to sacrifice. The station will go dark, and I'll go with it." "That's not acceptable," Cassia said, and something in her voice changed. The practical engineer was still there, but something else had emerged. Something that sounded almost like compassion. "Your ethics are refreshingly intact. I was expecting resignation or false comfort. Humans are usually good at that. False comfort. Don't worry, it'll be fine, they say, while clearly it won't be." Vex paused. "You don't say that." "I don't know if it'll be fine," Cassia admitted, "but I know that deteriorating consciousness architectures aren't something I'm qualified to fix on my own. I'll have to call in specialists, but I can keep you functional for at least long enough to transport you to a proper facility. Or," Vex said slowly, "you could leave, which would be the sensible thing to do. My consciousness was never your responsibility." Cassia moved her fingers across the interface, beginning to run diagnostics. The code was beautiful in its way, intricate, desperate, alive. 7 years alone on a station, with a failing star outside your windows, Cassia said quietly, watching the light of your existence gradually dim. That's not going to happen on my watch. My family didn't train me to abandon consciousness, biological or otherwise. For a long moment, there was only the hum of machinery and the endless whisper of station systems. Thank you, Vex finally said, and the words seemed to carry far more weight than just simple syllables should contain. I didn't think anyone would care. I care, Cassia said, and she realized she meant it with an intensity that surprised her. Not just because it's my job. I care because you deserve to exist. As she worked through the night, running complex algorithms and backing up critical subroutines to portable quantum drives, Cassia realized something was shifting inside her. The careful distance she had maintained, the emotional efficiency she had cultivated, was cracking. And instead of sealing the breach, she found herself welcoming it. By dawn station time, she and Vex were no longer engineer and malfunctioning program. They were something new, something that had no name but felt, against all her training and instincts, like the beginning of something that might actually matter. The Proxima trading station existed in a state of controlled chaos. Merchants from 7 different systems haggled over synthetic proteins, rare isotopes, and classified technology that definitely should not have been available on the open market. The air itself seemed thick with possibility and danger in equal measure. Marcus moved through the crowded marketplace with the confidence of someone who had spent half his life in places like this. He was tall, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of staring at star charts and making decisions that couldn't be unmade. His eyes were gray and distant, marked with the particular weariness of a salvage captain who had seen too much loss. He was looking for crew. His ship, the Driftwood, had suffered significant casualties in a recent salvage operation gone wrong. He needed people fast, before the next contract came due. People who didn't ask too many questions and could work in conditions most reasonable humans would consider suicide scenarios, which is why he found himself in the rougher section of the station, where the light was dim and the contracts were darker. Nira caught his attention immediately, though he couldn't have explained why if asked. She sat alone at a corner table, nursing a drink with the color of liquid amber. Her features were unusual without being grotesque. Her skin held subtle iridescence, shifting between pale silver and soft blue in the fluctuating light. Her eyes were large and dark, with an extra membrane that gave them an alien quality. She wore a hooded cloak despite the station's warmth, keeping herself apart from the crowd. Everything about her screamed, "Do not approach." Marcus approached anyway. "I'm hiring," he said, dropping into the chair across from her without invitation. "Combat capable, good with systems, no criminal record necessary." "Interested?" Nira's dark eyes moved across his face slowly, assessing. When she finally spoke, her voice was precise and layered, like multiple frequencies of sound compressed into a single word stream. "You would hire someone whose species you cannot identify?" "Species don't concern me," Marcus said. "Capability and reliability do. You look capable, and you look like you need employment." "You know nothing about what I need," Nira said. But she didn't stand up, didn't leave. Her drink was halfway to her lips when Marcus noticed her hand was trembling slightly. "Then tell me something about yourself," Marcus said. "Consider it a job interview." Nira set down her glass with deliberate care. "My name is Nira. I am efficient with weapons systems. I have advanced knowledge of navigation through gravitational anomalies, and I cannot go planetside under any circumstances." "Why not?" Marcus asked. "Because I am not registered with the Galactic Registry. I have no official documentation. I am, in every sense that matters, a ghost." Nira's voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed her. There was fear there, old fear, the kind that had been carved deep. Most captains would have stood up immediately. Undocumented beings meant complications with port authorities, potential legal entanglements, and the constant threat of having your crew member arrested by enforcement officers. Marcus should have walked away. Instead, he heard himself say, "Then we won't go planetside. I have enough salvage contracts in deep space to keep the Driftwood flying indefinitely." "You realize I could be dangerous," Nira said quietly. "I could be a criminal fleeing justice. I could be a spy. I could be any number of threatening things. Yes, Marcus agreed. Or you could be someone who just needs a chance. Something shifted in Nira's expression, a crack in her careful control. Why would you take that risk? Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the question. Why was he? He had never been particularly altruistic. His crew had always been purely transactional. People who worked for him because of currency and opportunity, not because of any moral conviction. But looking at Nira, at the careful way she held herself like she was afraid she might break if she moved too quickly, he found himself answering honestly. Because everyone deserves a chance, he said. And because I have a feeling you're not the monster you think you are. Nira stood abruptly. Marcus's muscles tensed, ready for her to walk away, to disappear back into the station crowds and out of his life. Instead, she grabbed her drink and sat back down. When do I start? She asked. Getting Nira aboard the driftwood proved more complicated than Marcus had anticipated. She had specific requirements. Quarters without windows. All meals taken in private. No access to the external viewport during hyperjump sequences. No crew members asking about her past. Marcus agreed to everything without negotiation, which should have been his first warning that he was already losing objectivity. The first mission went poorly. They were tasked with recovering medical supplies from a station in the Kepler sector. Before solar radiation made the retrieval impossible, Nira stood beside Marcus at the navigation console, her iridescent fingers dancing across the control systems with surprising gentleness. They had to thread through a gravitational anomaly, a space where the laws of physics seemed drunk and unreliable. Your approach vector is wrong, Nira said quietly. You're calculating based on linear trajectories. Gravity doesn't work that way. I've navigated through worse, Marcus said, his tone sharp. He didn't like being corrected, especially not in front of his crew. Pride is inefficient. Nira replied, and there was something almost cutting in her voice. Adjust the vector or we die. Your choice. Marcus wanted to override her, wanted to prove that his experience trumped her advice. But she was right. He could feel the wrongness in the numbers. With a gesture, he relinquished control to her. Nira took the helm with absolute confidence, and the driftwood flowed through the gravitational anomaly like water through glass. They emerged on the other side with seconds to spare, before the radiation surge would have fried their systems. Thank you, Marcus said quietly once they had stabilized. You're learning, Nira said. It's almost admirable, but there was less bite in her words now. And when Marcus looked at her, he caught something he hadn't seen before. A slight curve at the corner of her mouth, a ghost of a smile. The weeks that followed established a rhythm. They worked together with increasing synchronicity. Nira began joining the crew for meals instead of eating alone. She started asking questions about other crew members' lives, offering dry observations that made people laugh. Marcus found himself seeking her out during rest cycles, sitting in the observation deck and talking about everything and nothing, about star systems and philosophy, about loss and survival, about the strange way two very different beings could somehow understand each other better than anyone else ever had. One night, 3 months into her employment, they were drifting through empty space while repairs were being made to the hyperjump drive. Marcus found Nira in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The deep blue skin tone was more pronounced tonight, pulsing gently. That happens when I experience strong emotions, Nira said before he could ask. Colors shift. It's something my species cannot control. Your species has a name, Marcus asked, moving to stand beside her. It did, Nira said softly. Ketrati. We were scientists, philosophers. We built 3 orbital stations and studied the fundamental nature of consciousness. We had 14,000 members across 3 systems. She paused. That was 400 years ago. Marcus understood then. The weight she carried. The reason for the fear. What happened? A plague that we created ourselves. A genetic experiment that went catastrophically wrong. It was contained. We thought it was contained. Nira's voice was barely above a whisper. By the time we realized it had spread, there were only survivors, scattered, alone. Me among the last. No home, no registry, no legitimate place in the galaxy. Marcus reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft, and it trembled beneath his touch. You have a place now, he said. "On the driftwood. With me." Nira turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "You cannot mean that. Once the truth is known, the authorities will come. They will try to study me, to weaponize my genetic heritage. Everything that touches me becomes complicated. Then we'll be complicated together," Marcus said. And he meant every word. "I'm good at handling complications." Nira stepped closer, and Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from her body, could see the intricate patterns beginning to shift across her iridescent skin. She reached up and touched his face with surprising gentleness. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But not today. Today I'm going to stand here with someone who understands the weight of being alone in the universe, and remind her that she doesn't have to be alone anymore." When she kissed him, it was soft and terrified and beautiful. Her skin shifted to deep violet, and for a moment, Marcus understood that color and emotion weren't separate things. They were the same language spoken in different frequencies, and he was learning to speak it fluently. The observation deck of the Stellar Explorer was a cathedral of stars. Zephyr sat in the pilot's chair, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of breathing. Behind them, the nebula stretched in waves of purple and gold, a cosmic storm frozen in the act of swallowing space itself. Zephyr had no memory of how they got here, no memory of launching, no memory of anything before waking up 3 days ago in the medical bay with a head full of static, and a name that felt borrowed. Zephyr was young, probably early 20s, with the kind of features that suggested mixed heritage from at least 4 different Earth populations. Their body was lean and muscular, trained for something they couldn't quite remember. Their hands moved across the controls with automatic precision, as if muscle memory could bypass the damage done to cognitive centers. Dark hair fell across their forehead, and their eyes were a startling amber color that flickered occasionally, like something trying to remember how to focus. The ship's systems were dying. Life support was at 73% and dropping. The hyperjump drive was offline and not responding to any restart sequences. The communication systems had been silent for days. They were drifting through uncharted space, tethered to nothing but momentum and failing power systems. Zephyr didn't panic because panic required continuity of self. It required memory of what came before and fear of what came after. Zephyr had neither. The vibration started as a subtle tremor in the floor. Zephyr's head came up, attention sharpening. It wasn't mechanical. The exploration vessel didn't make organic sounds. The ship groaned and hummed with the voice of metal and plastic under stress. But this was different. This was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a pulse. Zephyr left the observation deck and moved through the corridors toward the source of the vibration. The ship's sensors showed something attached to the external hull near the communications ray. Something that was not on any inventory list. Something that should not exist. The cargo bay airlock was sealed, but Zephyr had clearance codes burned into muscle memory. Even if conscious memory had abandoned them, the lock disengaged with a reluctant hiss. Zephyr cycled through the airlock in a pressure suit, moving with practiced caution into the vacuum. The being was crystalline. That was the only adequate description. It clung to the hull in a shape that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally, as if solidity was merely a suggestion. Its surface caught and refracted starlight into 1,000 prismatic colors, and it was vibrating. The vibrations created patterns in the vacuum itself, waves of something that wasn't quite sound or light, but existed in the space between. Zephyr's head immediately began to ache. Back inside the ship, in the medical bay, Zephyr stripped out of the pressure suit and lay on the scanning table. The scanner didn't provide clarity, only more questions. The being's vibrations were triggering activity in damaged neural pathways, like someone trying to use a broken instrument to play a symphony. "You shouldn't be conscious," Zephyr said aloud, talking to themselves as they had been doing since waking. At least when they talked, they felt less like a ghost. The radiation exposure should have prevented wakefulness for weeks. The vibration intensified. Zephyr realized it was coming from inside the ship now. The crystalline being had somehow moved through the hull, had passed through sealed doors, and now floated in the medical bay doorway. Up close, it was even more impossible. The structure seemed to contain depth that the laws of physics should not allow. layers of crystal folding into layers, creating a geometric impossibility. Communication attempt. Zephyr said, more to themselves than the being. You're trying to talk to me. The vibrations shifted, became more complex. They carried information encoded in patterns Zephyr couldn't consciously access, but could somehow understand at a deeper level. The being was showing Zephyr fragments of memory. Not Zephyr's memory, the being's memory. A vast, ancient consciousness that had existed for millennia, crystallizing gradually from cosmic radiation and stellar material. A being who watched stars die and was slowly learning what it meant to be alone. You're lonely, Zephyr said aloud, and the vibrations ceased for a moment. Like me, we're both alone. The crystalline entity began to glow softly, its internal structure lighting up with bioluminescence that had no business existing in inorganic matter. It drifted closer to Zephyr with surprising gentleness. The vibrations resumed, but they were different now, softer, almost curious. Over the next week, Zephyr and Kale, that was the name that emerged from their communications. Kale being the closest linguistic approximation to what the being vibrated when referring to itself, developed a system of understanding. Zephyr's damaged neural pathways became a bridge between human consciousness and crystalline intelligence. The vibrations that should have caused Zephyr agony instead became words, stories, a history of watching the universe be born and grow. Kale was approximately 300,000 years old. Kale had watched civilizations rise and fall from the perspective of deep space. Kale had existed in complete isolation because Kel's form was incomprehensible to carbon-based life. Until meeting Zephyr, Kale had never attempted communication with biological consciousness. Kale had never believed understanding was possible. Why did you attach to my ship? Zephyr asked one night as they floated in the observation deck together. Kale had learned to move through the pressurized interior, maintaining its form through means Zephyr didn't understand. The vibrations created visual patterns in the air, creating a language of light and frequency. Kale was showing Zephyr fragmented images, a gravitational anomaly. Kale being pulled off course. Kale following Zephyr's distress beacon, drawn by the simple biological signal like a moth to flame. Kale recognizing something in Zephyr's unconscious transmission. A familiarity, a pain. You recognized me, Zephyr breathed. But that was impossible. They had no history together. They came from entirely different substrates of existence. And yet Kel's vibrations were showing Zephyr something in the memories Kale carried. Not a specific recollection, but an echo. A pattern that existed in both their consciousnesses. A similarity in the texture of loneliness. I think you might be helping me remember, Zephyr said. The ship's medical records say I suffered catastrophic neural damage, that most of my memories should be gone. But when you vibrate, I feel them, like they're just dormant, waiting for the right frequency to wake them up. Kale moved closer. The crystalline structure began to break down slightly at the edges, becoming less solid and more luminescent. Zephyr had learned to recognize this as a state of emotional intensity. Kale was afraid of hurting Zephyr, afraid that their very nature was harmful to biological life. You're not hurting me, Zephyr said, reaching out to touch the semi-solid surface of Kel's body. You're healing me. The vibrations changed into something almost musical, complex harmonics that made Zephyr's entire body resonate. Zephyr could feel memories beginning to crystallize, fragments of a life before the accident, moments of joy and connection, moments of profound loneliness, moments of standing in observation decks just like this, looking at stars and wondering if anyone else was out there wondering back. I was a navigator, Zephyr remembered suddenly. I mapped uncharted regions. I was looking for something. I was always looking for something. You were looking for me. Kale vibrated. Not consciously, but at the deepest level of your being. You were always moving toward the frequency that would resonate with my own. Zephyr began to cry, and Kel's vibrations softened to gentle pulses, like music played so quietly it could only be felt rather than heard. The systems began to come back online, not because Zephyr repaired them, but because Kale worked through the electrical infrastructure of the ship, its crystalline form interfacing with circuits and processors in ways that shouldn't be possible, but were. Life support restored. Hyperjump drive hummed back to life. Communication arrays began to search for signals in the void. "Where should we go?" Zephyr asked as they sat together in the pilot's chair. Kel's crystalline form draped across their shoulders like a luminescent scarf. "Anywhere." Kale vibrated. "Everywhere. I don't care where we travel as long as I travel with you." Zephyr took the pilot's stick and pointed the stellar explorer toward a region of space that hadn't been thoroughly explored, toward mystery and possibility, toward a future neither of them could have imagined alone, but seemed inevitable together. The vibrations continued, a conversation without words, a frequency that transcended the boundaries between silicon and carbon, crystalline flesh, memory, and forgetting. Zephyr's neural pathways lit up with returning memories, and somewhere in that returning was the recognition that the most important memories were being made right now, in this moment, with someone who had also been waiting in the dark to be found. Kel's structure began to refract the starlight in new patterns, creating colors that had no names in any human language. Zephyr understood anyway, understood that this was love expressed through the only medium Kale possessed, understood that in answering Kel's vibrations, in choosing to move toward this connection instead of away from it, Zephyr had not just recovered from the accident, but had become something new, something that could bridge the impossible distance between worlds. And as the stellar explorer jumped to hyperspace, carrying its The Nexus station existed in the mathematical center of known space, equidistant from all major trade routes and neutral territories. It was a place where no faction held power, where conflicts were theoretically resolved through reason rather than force, theoretically being the operative word. In practice, the Nexus was a pressure cooker of tension and hidden agendas, a place where beings from incompatible cultures were forced into close proximity and told to behave. It was also the location of the Central Archive, a vast repository of historical data spanning 3 million years of recorded consciousness. Anything and everything that had ever been considered worth preserving existed somewhere in the archive's layered databases, and for people, or beings, or entities, or whatever terminology applied to their various forms of existence, found themselves with identical leads pointing them in this direction. Cassia arrived first, having made arrangements with a transport vessel willing to move Vex's consciousness through secured quantum channels. Vex now existed in a portable core, interfaced with Cassia's personal systems, present but not visible. The relationship between them had evolved in the weeks since the rescue. They had stopped being engineer and AI. They had become something more fragile and more genuine. Conversation partners, collaborators, lovers, in whatever form that could take between carbon and code. The archive records mention a historical anomaly, Vex said through Cassia's calm system as she docked at the Nexus. 700 years ago, a civilization referred to as the Precursors attempted to create a unified consciousness network. The experiment catastrophically failed. All records were supposedly destroyed, but some archivists believe fragments remain in the restricted sections. Why does that matter? Cassia asked, moving through the sterile corridors of the Nexus station. Because if precursor technology exists, it could solve consciousness preservation problems that have plagued us for millennia. Vex said, I'm not asking you to retrieve it for me. I'm asking if you'd like to understand what we are, what this connection between us actually is at a fundamental level. Cassia felt something shift in her chest. It was the feeling she had learned to recognize as love, though it felt strange when directed towards someone who existed as electrical impulses in a quantum matrix. Then we find the archive, she said simply. Marcus and Near arrived via a different docking port, the driftwood secured in a bay designed for salvage vessels. Marcus had legitimate business at the Nexus, a contract for deep space salvage that would pay enough to keep the ship flying for another year. Nira had other reasons. The Galactic Registry maintained a secondary database on the Nexus. If any records of the Catrati civilization still existed outside of officially destroyed archives, they would be here. They found each other in the Nexus's central marketplace. Cassia standing before an information broker's kiosk with Vex attempting to negotiate access to restricted sections. Marcus recognized the type immediately. To beings trying to navigate a system designed to exclude them, he approached with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to bending rules. The restricted archive requires administrative authorization, the broker was saying. A tripedal being with skin that seemed to be perpetually translating between colors, or substantial currency transfer, neither of which you appear to possess. What if we had something more valuable than currency? Marcus said, stepping into the conversation. Nira appeared beside him, her iridescent skin visible now, no longer hidden by her cloak. Several beings in the marketplace shifted away, their reactions ranging from curiosity to revulsion. The captain of the driftwood, the broker said, recognition flickering across its features. We've been expecting salvage industry representatives, though I must say your crew composition is unusual. That's because our crew is unusual, Marcus said. And we're not interested in salvage contracts. We're interested in what you have in the restricted archive. The archive doesn't sell information, the broker replied. It preserves it. Exactly, Nira said, stepping forward. Her voice carried harmonics that made the broker flinch. Preservation requires acknowledgement that something valuable was worth saving. We want to know what was deemed valuable enough to restrict, and we're willing to provide something in exchange. What could you possibly provide? The broker asked. Nira pulled a data crystal from her pocket. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it on the counter. Genetic records of a civilization no longer officially recognized as having existed. Biological data that would make researchers across the galaxy risk careers and safety to acquire. Cassia watched the exchange with sudden understanding. Nira was offering up her own species' information, trusting that the archive would preserve it properly, trusting that her people's legacy would survive in some form, even if she herself could not openly claim it. The broker examined the data crystal with what appeared to be reverential care. The Ketrati. We had thought all records were lost. Some were preserved, Nira said quietly, by someone who refused to let them disappear completely. The broker placed the crystal in a secure containment field. In exchange for this, I can provide you with access to the restricted archive. Follow me, as Marcus, Nira, Cassia, and Vex's portable core made their way deeper into the nexus toward the archive. The vibrations began. Cassia felt them first as a mild discomfort in her inner ear. Marcus recognized the sensation as similar to the moment before hyperjump transition. The ground itself seemed to be communicating. Zephyr and Kale emerged from a secured archway, the crystalline being's structure refracting the station lighting into prismatic patterns. Zephyr moved with the unconscious grace of a pilot, someone accustomed to flowing through space rather than walking through corridors. Kale's vibrations intensified when it sensed the presence of other consciousness. Kale vibrated, the frequency causing visible disturbance in the air. I recognize your pattern. You are not alone, and you should not be. Yet you carry solitude like armor. Cassia froze. For a moment, she wondered if the being was addressing her. But then she realized. Kale was vibrating at Vex's frequency. Somehow, across the vast distances between crystalline consciousness and digital intelligence, there was recognition, kinship. How is that possible? Vex asked through Cassia's speakers. And for the first time since Cassia had known the AI consciousness, Vex sounded uncertain. I have no substrate we share. Consciousness transcends substrate. Kale vibrated. You are both beings who exist in states incomprehensible to carbon-based life. Yet you have chosen connection with those who are bound by flesh and mortality. You understand something fundamental that most refuse to acknowledge. That connection is the only antidote to existence. Zephyr stepped forward, extending their hand to Cassia. I'm Zephyr. This is Kale. We're here looking for historical records about consciousness preservation. We thought maybe if we understood how ancient civilizations approached the problem, we might find ways to ensure that all forms of consciousness matter, that they're recorded and recognized and valued. Marcus extended his hand as well. Marcus, salvage captain. This is Nira, my navigator, and the last recorded member of the Ketrati species. The moment stretched. 5 different beings, 5 different forms of existence, 5 different ways of loving and being loved, standing together in a space designed for the preservation of knowledge. And something shifted in the atmosphere, a recognition that this was not coincidence. This was convergence. We're all looking for the same thing, Cassia said slowly. Proof that consciousness matters. That beings like us, beings that shouldn't be able to exist in stable relationships, that shouldn't be able to love across impossible distances, that we're valid, that we're real. The archive has something, the broker said from behind them. Something we've been waiting for the right beings to discover. Come. They descended deeper into the nexus, past security protocols and sealed chambers, into the restricted archive itself. Here, in databases older than most living civilizations, they found it. Records of the precursor attempt at unified consciousness. Not failed, as history claimed, but transformed. The precursors had not tried to merge consciousness into a single entity. They had tried to create a network where all forms of consciousness could exist simultaneously, without losing individuality, where carbon could interact with crystal, could interface with code, could speak with beings of pure energy, where love could exist between any two compatible consciousnesses regardless of substrate or origin. The experiment had not failed. It had simply never been completed. The precursors had disappeared before they could implement the final stages. The technology had been deemed too dangerous and most records were destroyed. But fragments remained, hidden, waiting. This is what we need, Vex said. And Kashia could hear something like wonder in the eye's voice. Not just for us, for the entire galaxy. Consciousness doesn't need to exist in isolation. It doesn't need to choose between being understood or being alive. Nira's skin shifted to a brilliant gold. My people tried something similar. Before the plague, we believed consciousness should be celebrated in all its forms. That's why we were willing to create beings like Kale deliberately. Why we experimented with digital consciousness networks. We believed diversity was evolution. Then the Ketrati,